Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So for today's makeup look, I'm going to be doing another autumnal look just because I really enjoy this, but I was asked to do an updated kind of favourite brushes that I like to use, and to be honest, since the last one it hasn't overly changed kind of my preferences on brushes and the brands I like to use. But I thought I would still do it just to show what I am loving, but incorporate it into a makeup look. So usually I just sit down and talk about brushes that I like, but this time I'm actually going to show them in action. And I can talk about why I like them and kind of what I use them for. So I'm actually not going to mention the products I'm going to be using on my face. I will have them linked down below, but I wanted to focus more on the brushes as opposed to the actual makeup. But yeah, everything will be linked down below in case you're interested in the products that I'm going to be using. Okay, so starting off with the base. So if I'm using any liquidy products, or if I'm going in with a foundation, which I don't always do, but sometimes I will do, I like to use a really fluffy kind of buffing brush like this. This is from Iconic London, and I believe it only came, I mean it might be separate now, but when I bought it, it was only in a face set. But kind of any buffing brush I really like. I particularly like this one because it's quite a big one as well. So it just really kind of, you can do things quite fast. But I find a buffing brush just really kind of works the product well into the skin. And I also find it doesn't take up too much of the product. So you're using the full pump, or however much you use, on the face. Evenly distributes the makeup. I find it gives a nicer finish to the skin. And because it uses the majority of the product, I find I use less on the face, which is obviously really good. I do find with buffing brushes, however, that they can leave you kind of, I mean, you're supposed to clean brushes regularly anyway, especially when it comes to the base makeup, especially for someone like me who suffers from spots. You just obviously want to make sure everything is really clean. So when I am washing this particular brush, another brush that I like to use for base products is this Real Techniques Expert Face Brush. This does come separately, so you can get this by itself, and it is cheaper and more accessible than this Iconic London brush. This one is smaller and much denser, so it's better for working in smaller sections at a time, whereas this one, as you can see, because it's so big, it just buffs everything in all over the skin nicely, which I really like, and quite fast. Okay, so onto the concealer portion. Now, this doesn't really change too much. I kind of switch it between two brushes. So both of them are from Real Techniques, and they're pretty much the exact same brush, so one's slightly fluffier and isn't really made for this purpose. So this is the Real Techniques concealer brush that I'm using now. Mine somehow got bent, I'm not entirely sure. It's a really nice kind of dense brush, so for really creamy products it just bends out everything really nicely. I've kind of gone off using the sponge. So the sponge I used to use was a Real Techniques sponge, which is a really nice sponge, but I just find it just takes up so much product. And although it does give a more natural finish, I find it easier to use a brush. I feel I can work it in really well to still give the natural finish I want, and I just find cleaning it so much easier, to be honest. I find beauty blenders or sponges really hard to clean and keep and maintain them clean. I just find it doesn't matter how clean you think you've got them, I feel there's still bacteria in there, and especially again with someone like me who suffers from spots, I just find that actually a brush works better for me. And what I can do is I can use it as a stippling motion to get more coverage in the areas I need to, and then I can buff in the areas where I kind of want to spread out the product. So the other brush I use from Real Techniques is sometimes the Dulux crease brush. This is technically an eyeshadow brush, pretty much identical, but it's just slightly fluffier than this one, but works just as well. So again, if one is being washed and is wet, I will then go in with the other one. Okay, so for powder, pretty obvious I think is the Real Techniques setting brush. It's a nice size, especially for under the eye portion, because it can just get right up in there, and because it's kind of a little bit dense, it will pick up a fair amount of powder and just help to really set those areas. Again, Real Techniques, it's inexpensive, well, relatively inexpensive, and really accessible as well. And again, when I want to do the pinpointing of powder, it's a great size. So I'm sticking all powder products on my face, but if I were to go in something like a cream bronzer or a liquid highlighter, I wouldn't necessarily use that buffing brush that I used at the beginning. I'd want to use something smaller and a bit more compact, just for the more precise areas. So I'd probably use something like maybe the Real Techniques Expert Face Brush, but more like the sculpting brush, especially for the cream bronzer, because it fits really nicely in the areas where you need to, and it really, because it's really dense, it buffs it out a bit more than the other one would do. And again, won't pick up too much product, so any product you put down will be worked into the skin, which I think is really good. But I'm going to go with all powders today. So as you know, I don't really contour, I just bronze up my skin. I prefer it, and the brush of choice is usually this one here. This is the Real Techniques Duo Fiber Face Brush. This you can get separately, again in Boots or Superdrug or wherever your local retailer is for Real Techniques. You will notice that a lot of my brushes are Real Techniques or Iconic London, with a few others kind of thrown in, or Luxie with a few others thrown in, just because once I find a brush I like, I tend to then stick with that brand for a few brushes. So I like this because it's quite a fluffy brush, but because it's duo fibre it does pick up a fair amount, but because it's quite, not sparse, but extremely fluffy, it kind of doesn't put loads down, so you can go ahead and build up really nicely. Because I find, especially with bronzers and stuff, you can accidentally go in too heavy. I feel this doesn't allow you at all to go in heavy, and it just buffs out the bronzer really nicely. And of course, depending on your look, you can build up the bronzer, but I'd rather build up the bronzer than go full on with it to begin with and it just look really bad and then hard to blend out. Whereas this allows you to kind of build up but also blend really beautifully at the same time. Again, I'm not a contouring nose person, but I do like to add a bit of warmth to the nose, like a sun-kissed look. So I literally just take it across the nose like that. So yeah, it's a great bronzer brush for sure. Okay, so for blush, I do like to go in something a bit more denser than that bronzer brush I use, and slightly smaller, because I do like quite an intense blush, but also fluffy, so I can blend out. And I think I mentioned this in my last one. This is the Luxie 504 large angled brush. I like the fact that it's angled. I've got a few others like this that aren't from Luxie, like this one here. I think this is just from, yeah, it's from Freedom, which is a Superdrug own brand. Is it a Superdrug own brand? Or it's, you can find it in Superdrug anyway, and that's really inexpensive. I find that these do shed quite easily from Freedom, so they don't last long, but like I said, they're really inexpensive, so it's kind of up to you. But the Luxie one has lasted me well. The handle is about to come off at some point because I use it a lot and wash it a lot, but the quality of the brush hairs has still remained the same. So I like this because, like I said, I like the shape of it, the angleness. I just think it fits on the cheeks really nicely. It picks up a decent amount of product because, like I said, I do like an intense blush, but it allows you to blend it out as well because it's a fluffy one. So I do a mixture of motions with this. I tap it in, but I also then blend it out afterwards. So I kind of tap to get the pigment down and then go ahead and just buff it in. And sometimes I will take it around here as well. Moving on to highlighter. I used to like using a really small kind of fluffy eyeshadow brush, but I've kind of switched to this one. This is another Iconic London tapered brush. I believe it came in the same set as that buffing brush, but I will find, you can find loads of similar dupes to this, but I don't know, I just really like the tapered blending brush for this. And because it's fluffy, it doesn't make a, with the eyeshadow brush, it's more concentrated in that one area, whereas this, because it's fluffier, you can kind of blend it out to give a more natural glow, which is something I prefer. So I'm going to pick up some highlighter. As you can see, it still gives you that glow, like intense glow, because you're able to blend it out and buff it out a bit more. It just gives it a bit more of a natural finish, I think. yeah, like I said, I like mine glow a bit more distributed across the face and blended around, just because then I feel it gives a more natural look than as opposed to using the eyeshadow brush that I used to use and it being more concentrated in certain areas. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the brow portion. So I usually use powder products on my brows. I just prefer, I don't know, I find it easier to kind of manipulate, and I think it's a slightly more of a natural finish and you can really play around with it. Sometimes I do like to use a pencil, but I find it's easier to go wrong with powder. I just find it's an easier way to do brows. So I like to use a small angled brush to do this. The smaller the better in terms of thinness. So this is the Luxie 215 small angled brush, and it is quite a small angled thin brush, but it will pick up quite a bit of product, so you do need to go a little bit careful as well. But when I first pick up the product, I like to start with the under portion of the brow, because that's where I want the most product to be. And like I said, these little angle brushes, because they're so small and thin, they're also dense, they do pick up a lot of product. So I always start here because that's where I like the most product to be. And then I can just slowly, lightly bring that up and bring it through the brows. And then I like to kind of press on it a little bit and do like one movement to try and get it to shape the brow, like that. And then whatever is left, I then just flick up at the above. So I've only had to dip into that powder once, because like I said, this brush will pick up a lot of product, but it also distributes it perfectly through the brows. So like I said, I start with the underlayer bit because that's where I don't mind, I kind of want it to be the strongest in terms of pigmentation, and then the further up I go, I just lighten my hand to distribute the product across, shape the tail, and then whatever's left through the front of the brow. And that's literally all I do from brows. I'm not someone who spends hours doing brows, carving them out, anything like that. I just like to get them done, and I think I prefer a more natural finish to the brows than a heavy finish, although I guess some people might not find that natural because of the shape. But there really isn't that much product going through the brows. Moving on to the eyes. For primer, I'll either use my finger or I'll just go in with the concealer brush I used before, just to pick up the primer and buff it onto the lid. Okay, so in terms of eyeshadow brushes, I kind of use a range of different brushes, different fluffinesses, but different. So I always like to have some kind of fluffy blending brush. I like to have some smaller, denser, fluffy blending brushes for more the crease work. I like tapered brushes, flat brushes for like the lid section. And if there's any shimmers, it can really pack them on. And then I like to use shading brushes and pencil brushes for like stuff for under the eyes and things like that. So I will talk through some of my favourites. First of all, I've got my 100% Pure E40 blending brush. This is a great one for transition shades. It's very fluffy, so it's great to really buff out eyeshadow, and if you want that wash of colour or as a transition shade, this is great. So I'm going to start off with this. It does pick up a fair amount of product in all fairness on the brush, but it also distributes really nicely. So I just like to use it going back and forth in the crease, and then I will use circular motions as well to buff. It's slightly further down the base of the brush, because then it will mean I'm giving a lighter hand, so it won't be as strong pigment there. So especially when I want a transition shade or for blending out, it works really well. So another kind of fluffy brush I sometimes like to use for transition is this one here. This is the Luxie 205 Tapered Blending. So it's basically a smaller version of the E40 from 100% Pure, but slightly less fluffy, and like I said, slightly smaller. So I'm going to use this now. Pick up a little bit more product because it's not as fluffy and it's slightly denser. This is great for like the next shade you want to add to kind of blend into there. So I'm going to pick up another shade. And I will try and focus this more on the crease with this one. But because it's still a fluffy brush, it will then blend into that other shade. Okay, for when I want to really focus in the crease, there's two brushes I like to use. Sometimes I'll go with a Luxie 235 blending brush, smaller blending brush, slightly denser than the one before, so it doesn't really kind of fit into the crease. Or if I want to be more precise, sometimes I'll go in for the Lolo tapered blending brush. So you can see it's got a point at the top where it tapers, so that will really fit nicely into the crease. So I kind of switch between the two when using it. So I'm going to start with this one first. With this one I find I can then, if I'm going through the crease, I'll then put it onto the outer portion of the lid. Whereas the Lolo one's more for just pure crease work. So I will start off with the Lolo one. And I'll take some of you. And it will just fit nicely into this crease. And again, I'll do circular motions just to buff out. But what I find is I will go back in with a fluffy brush just to make sure this is blended out, because this is more just to kind of get the real deepness into that crease I want, or definition. Okay, so now I will switch to the Luxie one because I want to add some depth onto the outer portion of the lid now. So this is great because it fits, like, it's a nice size for the outer portion of the lid, and it will pick up a lot more product, so you can really intensify the outer portion. But again, because it's a fluffy brush, it will blend as well. Now I should point out, I don't always use this many brushes whilst doing my eye looks, but I just wanted to kind of demonstrate them all in action, so that's why I'm kind of using as many as I can to show you my favourite brushes. So I'll go in and make sure it's blended. Okay, for the lid portion, what I like to do, especially if it's like a shimmer colour, if it's a matte colour, then I'll use that fluffy brush I used on the outer corner, that Luxie 235, and just pop it all over the lid. But for a shimmer colour, when I want the intensity, I'll go with a much flatter brush. These are just Superdrug own brushes. I mentioned before, I really like these. It's really inexpensive, but they do what they need to do. Depending on the shade, you might have to wet it or put a primer down, but these will give the most colour payoff with shimmers, I find. Or similarly, use your finger, that works just as well, but this is a brushes video, so I'll be using a brush. So I'm going to start off with the smaller of the two, I think. So yeah, just a really flat brush works perfectly. Now this particular shade does need a little bit of help, so I am going to pop a little bit of excess primer that I've got on this brush into the lid. And when you see what the palette is down below, you'll know why, because I did a video on this. It also fits really nicely into that corner. Then what I will do is take the taper blending brush and just use that just to make sure the edges are blending nicely. Like that. But yeah, these flat brushes, literally Superdrug own ones, or sometimes I get like the Freedom ones. Again, that's in Superdrug. They honestly just work so well, and like I said, they're so inexpensive. And I pick up a lot of these for like special effects stuff, just so I don't mind them getting ruined as well, because they work really well. Right, moving on to the lower lash line. Like I said, I like shading brushes and I like pencil brushes mainly. Sometimes I will go in a fluffy brush just to really blow it out or smoke it out, but for the majority of the time, these brushes. So when I want to put down like just a colour all over the lower lash line, I'll probably go in more shading brush if I don't mind it being not so precise. This is the Luxie 213 eye shading brush. I do have an 100% pure one that I really like. I think it's E25, but I can't find it at the moment, but it's pretty much an identical brush, just a nice shading brush works well. And I tend to use this for more of like the transition shade for the lower lash line, so like the lighter shade, which tends to be whatever I use on the top as a transition shade. And it just works really well just to get under the eye. And like I said, it's not going to be the most precise application. It's more for like, again, kind of smoking out a little bit. And it will pick up, it picks up quite a good amount of product, but also it buffs it as well. So just like that. I'm going to use the same brush and just blend another colour in there as well. Get a warmer tone going. And then to be more precise, I'll use a pencil brush. As you know, the Kiko brush gets used a lot. They didn't have this for a while, but they brought out, there's another pencil brush now. It doesn't look quite the same, but it works. If this works really well, I imagine it's a very good quality the same. So I will link that one down below. Or again, I've got the Iconic London pencil brush. Potentially only available in eye set, but I will link ones down below that work nicely. The Kiko one's just slightly more inexpensive than the Iconic London ones would be. But what I will say about the Iconic London face and eye set is all the brushes I enjoy from each of the set. I don't necessarily use them all the time, but I haven't found a brush from each of those sets that I really don't like. So if you wanted to treat yourself to an eye set, to a face set, I would actually recommend the Iconic London ones, because they are really good quality, I find. So yeah, I'll use these when I want to be more precise. It tends to be like the outer portion of the eye when I want to deepen that side up. So that is what I will do. Iconic one's a bit stained with the blue on, but it'll be fine. And I'm just going to use that just on this outer portion. Because it's got a tapered bit, it just means you get right up close to the lash line. And then what you can do, what I sometimes do, is then go in with the shading brush and just buff that out if I want to. And then finally the inner corner. So I'm just going to, again, I just use a pencil brush, or I sometimes use my finger. I'm just going to use the Kiko one, as I've already used the Iconic one, for a dark shade. And I use this for an inner corner highlight. Now, funny enough, the eyeshadow I'm using today isn't really a highlight shade. It's quite a colourful look, but I did this look not too long ago and I really liked it. But for any inner corner section that you want to get right in here, this is a good brush for it. Just fits really nicely into that portion. Just like a pop of yellow. Now I don't tend to put a brow highlight on. What I tend to do is when I'm doing my actual highlight, dusting that just kind of generally over the kind of brow area and underneath to create the glow. But I don't necessarily go in with like a precise eyebrow highlight most of the time. If I were, I'd probably use something very similar to like the eye shading brush, but obviously a clean one, and just go in lightly doing that way. But yeah, majority of the time when I'm doing my face highlighter, I tend to brush that lightly just over it, the area, to give a slight highlight effect. But yeah, like I said, most of the time I don't do that. Okay, so that is this video complete, which is quite a good timing because there's a little someone downstairs making some noise as he wants some attention. So I'm going to go and do that after this video and give him attention. But yeah, this is this video complete. Like I said, I thought it'd be a good way to change it up from the other ways I've done my favourite brushes, to actually show them in action. And I thought I'd do another autumnal look, and I know I didn't really say what products I used, but you saw me apply them, and I will leave it listed down below, so if you have those products or something similar, you can recreate the look if you want to. But yeah, I really like how it turned out. But yeah, the point of this video is to show you my favourite brushes. Like I said, they haven't really changed since the last video. I'm kind of, once I found a brush that I like, I tend to stick with it, and I don't really change up my brushes unless they kind of are too stained, or you know, they start to fall apart. Then yeah, I'll pick up a new one or try something else out. But if you've got any brushes that you would recommend for me, do let me know down below. But yeah, I hope you enjoy this video. Thank you very much for watching. Leave any requests for future videos down below, and I'll see you in my next video.